Hi, I'm Tom Brookshire.
And I'm Pat Summerall. With just 3 weeks to go in the NFL season, 2 of the 8 playoff teams are now set. The Miami Dolphins clinched week before last, and that's the earliest any team has clinched since the San Diego Chargers way back, Tom, in 1961.
Yes, that was a long time ago, Pat. In fact, that was the Chargers' first year in San Diego after they moved south out of Los Angeles. It was also my last year as an active player. Anyway, it really has been a long, long time since anybody clinched it like the Dolphins did.
And last week, another team clinched a playoff spot almost as early, and that team, of course, would be George Allen's amazing over-the-hill gang. And Tom, you were in Washington last week. What were your impressions of those Redskins?
Gosh, I think they still played just about well enough to get the job done. They look too old, and they look too fat, and they look like they're going to fade, and they play better in the second half than they do in the first.
They're amazing. Even though 2 of the 8 playoff teams are set, amazingly enough, more than half the 26 teams are still in contention for the other 6 spots. And we'll be looking at all those races, as well as giving you our selection of the best of the week at the end of the show.
And after a week's vacation from our fearless predictions, we'll be back at it again this week, Pat, and I'm going to try to clinch that series soon.
I did better when I wasn't here. But don't forget the furious, famous Summerall stretch drive. I'll be making my move any week now. You just wait.
All right, I'll wait for that one.
Last week, after a long and dreary season, the New Orleans Saints put a feather in their cap, and they called it the Los Angeles Rams.
In New Orleans, the Saints went looking for their second victory of the season when Gumbo II welcomed the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams dominated play in the early minutes, but though they moved the ball well, they had to settle for a 3-0 advantage at the end of the first period. Then Archie Manning sparked the Saints, connecting with Danny Abramowitz down the sidelines on a 34-yard play. Archie completed the 79-yard drive on the 13th play, keeping and sweeping 5 yards for 6. In the third period, the Rams' Jim Bertelsen scored on a 5-yard run after a 63-yard drive in 6 plays, making it Rams 13, Saints 10. But on the next series, Archie drove the Saints back 64 yards in 7 plays, hitting number 41 Bobby Newland on a 23-yard touchdown pass. New Orleans led by 3, but the Rams evened it up. Then Archie moved New Orleans into field goal range with just 6 seconds left. Number 9, Happy Feller, converted a 33-yarder to break the tie, and Happy, after a not-so-happy tenure with the unhappy Philadelphia Eagles, was happy once more, as New Orleans further jeopardized the Rams' playoff hopes, beating Los Angeles final New Orleans 19, LA 16.
It seems that every season, no matter what their record, the New Orleans Saints somehow managed to cause some trouble in the NFC West, huh?
That's right, Pat, and every season the San Francisco 49ers seem to face the Dallas Cowboys in one of those crucial games, and they lose. For the last 2 years, the Cowboys have ended 49er drives to the Super Bowl with victories in the NFC Championship game. But last week, and you were there, the 49ers broke that jinx up for good.
40 strong, the San Francisco Red Wave rolled into Texas Stadium needing a victory to stay atop the NFC's Western Division. But the Cowboys were ready to feast on this 49er team they had beaten so many times in the past. The challenge for the Doomsday defense was Steve Spurrier, and they poured in on the young 49er passer. Spurred by his defense, quarterback Craig Morton fired bullets that creased the seams in the San Francisco secondary. The multi-splendored Dallas attack rolled one way and often caught the 49ers' flow moving in the wrong direction. The yards came tougher on the ground, but Dallas had Walt Garrison, the toughest cowboy of them all. Tucked behind his pulling guard, Blaine Nye, number 61, Garrison battered to a touchdown and a 7-0 Cowboy lead. Dick Nolan was properly concerned, but today he would see a defense he had molded in the image of the Cowboys turn defeat into victory. Balancing the experience of 35-year-old tackle Charlie Kruger was the ferocious rush of 23-year-old Cedric Hardman, number 86. Morton was decked repeatedly, and when number 64, Dave Wilcox, blindsided him, he fumbled on one bounce to number 52, Skip Vanderbunt, who raced to the tying touchdown. After a harrowing first quarter, Steve Spurrier settled down and drifted confidently behind matchless protection until his receivers spun clear of the secondary's web. In the second quarter, Spurrier spotted Gene Washington, number 18, running free to the post. Charlie Waters was called for interference, and one play later, Ken Willard scored, and San Francisco led 14-7. Spurrier received a break when Washington and Ted Kwolek, number 82, ended up side by side on a busted pattern. Instead of an interception, Washington turned the play into a spectacular gain. When number 22, Vic Washington, picked off Chuck Howley's blitz, Spurrier calmly passed to Kwolek for another score. Another look at the play shows that Howley was joined by linebacker Leroy Jordan in a blitz. Jordan, number 55, was bounced by Woody Peoples, and Spurrier's pass was perfect to his tight end. The 31-10 rout of Dallas was fittingly climaxed by the defense as Skip Vanderbunt stepped in front of a Morton pass and strolled to his second touchdown. For Vanderbunt, his great day was richened by the knowledge that after 11 weeks, the 49ers had claimed sole possession of first place in the West.
Last week against the Chicago Bears, Cincinnati Bengal coach Paul Brown started quarterback Virgil Carter for the first time this season, hoping that Carter, who's an ex-Bear, could end the Bengals' losing streak with what they call a vengeance victory.
In Chicago, the weather was foul, the kind of day when an experienced quarterback was a definite asset. However, Bobby Douglas could lead the Polar Bears nowhere with his misdirected throws. On the other hand, Bengals quarterback Virgil Carter, number 11, had Essex Johnson, number 19, who proved to be the difference as he plowed his way goalward. A short Carter to Johnson pitch spelled defeat for the Bears as the Bengals gave them the cold shoulder, 13-3.
While the Bengals ended their victory drought, Pat, the Baltimore Colts ran their winning streak to 2 games.
For the 8th week in a row, the New England Patriots floundered, and meek as minnows, they were hooked, gutted, and filleted by Baltimore.
New England interim head coach Phil Bingston did not walk into Memorial Stadium with long, confident strides. And like their coach, the Patriots traveled in short, choppy steps and mostly backwards. Only once did the Patriots threaten, but their field goal attempt fell woefully short, and the rejuvenated Colts cavorted in the gleeful manner of their rich past. Marty Domrys, the AFC's leading passer, threw for 3 touchdowns against the undermanned Pats defense. 2 TDs were caught by Sam Haverlack, number 17, a converted halfback and quarterback. And the third went to tight end Tommy Mitchell after a pretty play-action fake to Don McCauley. For sophomore quarterback Jim Plunkett, it was another day of disaster. Plunkett was chased, driven into his blockers, and then nailed by a right cross by number 79 Jim Bailey. Whenever Plunkett was forced to scramble, his path to the safety of the sidelines was cut off and he was brutalized. On one rare occasion when he was protected, Plunkett was betrayed by John Tarver, whose muff fell into the grasp of Mike Curtis. After 4 feeble quarters, the Patriots fell to the rebounding Colts 31-0.
After experiencing the NFL's most brutal scheduling through the first 10 weeks of the season, the San Diego Chargers were overdue for a breather. And last week against Houston, they could have hyperventilated.
San Diego Stadium has been waiting for a Charger home victory since the second week of the season. So the lowly Houston Oilers were welcomed with open arms and a little gang tackling. Houston's first punt gave the win-hungry Chargers nourishment for a season-ending change of fortune, as number 42 Jesse Taylor blocked the kick and then accepted the touchdown. While the San Diego season has taken a sharp upswing, the Oilers have nothing to look forward to but a few more chapters in the tragic saga of Dante's Inferno. Number 7 Dante Pastorini was intercepted by number 30 Brian Salter as the San Diego defense asserted itself and continued the Charger change of image. Theoretically, San Diego defense is now ready to shoulder the responsibility of victory in equal measure to the historically strong Charger offense. Against Houston, at least, the theory held water, as number 37 Sid Edwards turned ball possession into big yardage. Complimenting Edwards, the blasting cap was firecracker quick Mike Garrett, number 20. Garrett zipped for 102 yards and Edwards bucked for 2 touchdowns as San Diego piled on the points. Number 21 John Hadel closed out the Chargers' point production at 34 with this quick pitch to Davey Williams. While San Diego's hypothesis was falling into place, Houston had to be grateful for each tiny success. Their best execution of the day came on a fourth quarter onside kick. Substitute quarterback Kent Nix, number 14, lent respectability to the final score with a last-second pass to number 21 Fred Willis. But the victory went to San Diego's new theory of relativity in a relatively easy 34-20 win over the Houston Oilers.
Last week in Oakland, Tom, the Raiders met the Chiefs in the annual Decide the AFC West game.
And Pat, the AFC West was virtually decided as those two enemies played their most lopsided game since 1968. That series now is dead even, 13-2.
Last week in Oakland, it was almost midnight for Hank Stram and his Kansas City Chiefs, who needed the win to stay in contention in the AFC West. But beating the Oakland offense is never easy, especially Fred Biletnikoff, who loves to catch passes in those dark corners of the Oakland end zone. For Chiefs quarterback Lynn Dawson, it looked like the beginning of a long day. But it wasn't, because an early injury forced him, Buck Buchanan, and Willie Lanier to the sideline. With those three out, the Raiders rolled as number 23, Charlie Smith, blazed around the Chiefs. then later accounted for the first Oakland score. The Raiders-Chiefs rivalry also contains individual battles, like that of number 25, Fred Biletnikoff, and number 40, Jim Marsalis, who fought it out in the dark corner. Marsalis won this one. But 3 plays later, it was Biletnikoff's victory, a more permanent one because it counted for 7. Still, Fred was nice enough to call Jim's attention to the fact that he'd been beaten. So while the Chiefs fell deeper into the hole, the Raiders gobbled up many of their mistakes. And when Oakland couldn't turn them into touchdowns, George Blanda turned them into field goals for a big silver and black lead. Oakland's love affair with Marv Hubbard waxed as hot as ever, and Mother ripped for almost 100 yards. Much of Hubbard's success was due to his bloody, battered, and awesomely tough offensive line. Finally, a Darryl LaMonica pass to a wide-open Raymond Chester finished the Chiefs. Chester, who was playing with an injury, made the final score 26-3, which for a Kansas City-Oakland game is quite a lopsided score. It dropped the Chiefs 2.5 games behind with only 3 to go. For some Chief fans, there was anger, but for Lynn Dawson and his teammates, the clock lacks but 1 tick until it strikes 12 to end their disappointing and unexpectedly poor season.
Last week, Detroit fans got their first in-person look at Joe Namath and the New York Jets, Tom, and they didn't seem to be very impressed.
Well, you know how Detroit fans are, Pat. They love to make fun of the Eastern City Slickers.
In Detroit, fans like their heroes larger than life. Man-eaters who can devour an opponent whole. They can be downright unkind to those who don't measure up. But last week, Joe Namath wasn't worrying about his image in Detroit. He was only concerned with cracking the tough Lion defense in a bid to capture a wild card berth for the playoffs. He chose a bristling running attack led off by number 44, John Riggins. Emerson Boozer was out with an injury, but Riggins was complimented nicely by number 42, Clifford McLean. Riggins and McLean both churned out over 100 yards. But this is the year of the runner, and 100-yard rushers can be found growing on trees. Number 42, Aldi Taylor, made it 3 in this game alone. All this running around left the score 7-3 Jets before number 11, Greg Landry, opened up the air lane. Number 49, Larry Walton, danced in, and suddenly Landry liked the pass very much indeed, especially with a recuperated Charlie Sanders on the receiving end. Number 88's patented flying flip for the end zone set up Landry's 1-yard touchdown sneak to put the Lions on top. But then Namath revved up his air arm and brought the Jets roaring back. Namath used his all-purpose running backs to set up 2 Bobby Howfield field goals. Then he upped his 1972 touchdown pass total to 20 with a perfect placement to number 88, Rich Castor. Castor's touchdown left the Landry-Namath shootout tied at 20. But when everything else is equal, Landry has an added dimension to call on. Greg Landry's legs left it up to Namath's arm with time running out. But this time, New York's comeback attempt fizzled as number 59, Charlie Weaver, pulled off the game breaker. Was Charlie pleased by his performance? Just watch. Weaver's act was hard to follow, but smooth Altie Taylor came up with the perfect topper. Taylor's run gave him 124 yards for the day and closed out a robust 37-20 Lion triumph, as Detroit eased into a tie with Green Bay for first place in the NFC Central and eased New York out of contention for a wild card playoff berth.
So Detroit is now tied with Green Bay for first place in the ever-tightening NFC Central, Pat.
Speaking of tight races, Tom, the tightest of all would seem to be the NFC's West, where all the talk seems to be about San Francisco and Los Angeles, but where the Atlanta Falcons lurk just one half game from the lead.
Last Sunday, John Ralston led his Denver Broncos into Atlanta Stadium with hopes of catching the Falcons on the downgrade after their hard-fought Monday night loss in Washington. On the Broncos' first series, Charlie Johnson fooled the Falcons with a play-action pass to running back Joe Dawkins, subbing for injured Bobby Anderson. Dawkins subsequently scored from the 1. And following an Atlanta fumble, Charlie Johnson found his massive rookie tight end Riley Odoms, who put Denver within scoring range again. The Broncos held a 13-0 lead in the second quarter, while the Falcons had amassed a total offense of only 6 yards. It definitely looked like just one of those Sundays for Bob Berry and the Falcons. Finally, the NFC's top-ranked defense began to assert itself. Number 71, right end John Zook stormed in and met left end Claude Humphrey, number 87, at the quarterback. Result, a fumble which seemed to be an easy recovery for number 79, Chuck Walker, but which somehow wound up in the grasp of Denver offensive guard Laren Jackson, number 68. The Broncos were not so fortunate when Charlie Johnson faked and faded to his goal line. Claude Humphrey's safety gave the Falcons their first 2 points, and then the offense took over, featuring the near-perfect quarterbacking of conference-leading passer Bob Berry and the timely receiving of fullback Art Malone, number 25. In all, Berry hit on 13 of 16 pass attempts, and 5 of them went to Art Malone. Malone also scored 2 touchdowns, and the Falcons finally went ahead 16-13 just before halftime. After his second touchdown, Malone displayed one of the season's most unusual spiking techniques. In the third period, Bob Berry passed to tight end Jim Mitchell, who turned a short gain into one of the season's most spectacular plays. Unfortunately for Mitchell, most of his effort was nullified by a clip. But 2 plays later, Berry passed to Wes Chesson, and the second-year wide receiver scored his first professional touchdown. Trailing by 10 in the fourth quarter, Steve Ramsey passed to Rod Sherman for one last touchdown. But Atlanta held on to win 23-20 and remained just 1/2 game behind San Francisco in the NFC West.
In Washington last week, the Redskins needed only a victory over the tough Green Bay Packers to lock up a playoff berth.
Super Bowl hopes are sky high in Washington, but everybody's got their feet on the ground. Redskin fans and players alike are taking each game one at a time, savoring the season, enjoying their own enthusiasm. For Stuffed with Ice Cream and Goodwill for All but their next opponent, the Redskins' holiday season began in September. And after 9 victories, only one more over the big tough Green Bay Packers would secure their second playoff berth in 2 years under George Allen. But on the first play of this game, number 43 Larry Brown fumbled and Green Bay had a break, which might have won the game outright for the Packers. 4 plays later, Green Bay came away with nothing when Chester Marcole's field goal attempt was blocked by Ron McDowell. In the second quarter, little number 37 Pat Fisher intercepted a Scott Hunter floater, and Washington had the ball at the Green Bay 37. Five plays later, Larry Brown wheeled into the end zone, and Washington was in front to stay. On their next series, Billy Kilmer hit Jerry Smith with a 25-yard touchdown pass, and the half ended with Washington leading 14-6. Jerry Taggy replaced an injured Scott Hunter. And Washington had a break when Dave Davis dropped this breakaway pass on the way to an easy touchdown. But MacArthur Lane brought the Packers close when he banged over in the fourth period. Billy Kilmer then drove 78 yards in 10 plays, picking an injury-deleted Packer secondary like an old turkey carcass. With Jimmy Hill and Ken Ellis out of the game, Charlie Taylor finally caught the deciding touchdown. The consistent Washington defense then put down the hard-nosed Packers. And in the end, the Packers and Jerry Taggy sat beaten 21-16 at the bottom of RFK Stadium. And Dyron Talbot and the Redskins celebrated at least a wild card invitation to the playoffs.
Last Sunday, the Buffalo Bills stood in the path of the Cleveland Browns' 6th straight victory as these two teams from the Great Lakes region met for the very first time.
In Cleveland, O.J. Simpson and his teammates made their first appearance in what was the final regular season game at the Lakefront Stadium. The contest was billed as a duel between two of the NFL's premier running backs, O.J. and Leroy Kelly. The Browns were after their 6th consecutive victory. The Bills were going for their 2nd straight, but from the opening kickoff, the Bills nearly ran the Browns right into frozen Lake Erie. After Tony Green blazed 66 yards, O.J. Simpson, behind unaccustomed blocking from his teammates, tiptoed into the end zone for a touchdown. For O.J., it was the start of another fine day. He just missed gaining 100 yards for the 5th time this year, but he did surpass the coveted 1,000-yard mark for the first time in his career. Meanwhile, Cleveland's young star Mike Phipps was misfiring badly. Twice, Phipps was intercepted inside the Buffalo 7-yard line as the Bills reacted to their good fortune, with all the aplomb of a team that has not won more than 3 games in a season for the past 5 years. Midway through the 2nd quarter, Buffalo led 10-0. But that was it for the Bills, for as they have all season long, the Browns, led by Mike Phipps and Leroy Kelly, came bouncing back. Though he seldom had room to run, the old pro Kelly overshadowed young pro Simpson and sparked a Cleveland comeback that tied the game 10-10 by the half. The play that iced the victory, however, was made by number 81, Nick Roman, who, because of injuries, is one of 8 defensive ends to start for Cleveland this year. The 27-10 win enabled the Browns to keep pace with Pittsburgh and set the stage for this week's showdown.
Last week in Pittsburgh, Tom, the Steelers warmed up for this week's showdown with Cleveland by taking on a rather rugged adversary from that other Central Division.
And that rugged adversary would be the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the last time they met was 3 years ago. The final score was Steelers 14, Vikings 52.
Near the confluence of the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio rivers, there is a stadium called, for obvious reasons, Three Rivers Stadium. And this is the home of pro football's newest championship threat, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last week against the Minnesota Vikings, the Steelers were more hospitable than usual as an early fumble gave the Vikings an early 3-0 lead. On their next series, the Vikings were stopped cold at the Pittsburgh 8. And when the Vikings lost a fumble in their own backyard, the Steelers and Franco Harris cashed it in for a 7-3 lead. Twice more, the Vikings drove inside the Pittsburgh 10, and twice more they failed to score. The game's first long play came midway in the third quarter when Terry Bradshaw threw a quick screen pass to Ron Shanklin. Shanklin's 43-yard gain set up a field goal and a 10-3 Steeler lead. But in the fourth quarter, Fran Tarkenton brought the Vikings back with a long pass to John Gilliam. Gilliam was finally downed at the Steeler 5 after a 63-yard gain. And on the next play, Tarkenton tossed to tight end Stu Voigt for the tying touchdown. In all, Frantic Francis hit on 24 of 43 attempts for 235 yards. On the next series, fantastic Franco Harris broke the game open. As Coach Chuck Knowles said after the game, he amazes me. Every week he makes the big play. And with 2.5 minutes to go, the Pittsburgh defense came up with another big play, as number 53, Henry Davis, stopped Ed Marinaro on 4th and 1 at the Viking 29-yard line. As usual, the Steelers' steel curtain defense had done its job, allowing just 10 points. And as usual, Franco Harris had done his job, gaining over 100 yards for the 5th straight game and for the 6th time in 7 games. The finishing touches were added by Terry Bradshaw and number 43, second-year wide receiver Frank Lewis. The Pittsburgh Steelers have now won 8 and lost 3 and have almost assured themselves a spot in the playoffs. But this week it's arch rival Cleveland, and the division title is at stake.
Well, as a former Philadelphia Eagle, I really wish we could have ended the show after the last game that we showed you. But as all Eagle fans must, I've learned to take the bitter with the sour.
In New York, the Giants' football flag was flying as high as their hopes for a divisional playoff berth. And last week, they continued to fly far above the down-gliding Eagles, who were destined to face 60 minutes of a determined Giant offense. From the start, it looked as if the Giants would run roughshod over the Eagles as Joe Orduña, number 49, almost broke this kick return. Only a diving tackle by Eagle kicker Tom Dempsey, number 19, saved a possible touchdown. The thundering Giants first scored on a pass from Norman Snead, number 16, to tight end Bob Tucker, number 38. Then Eagle turnovers led to further Giant tallies. Willie Williams, number 41, picked off a John Reeves throw, while 3 Philadelphia fumbles further shot down the Birds. The Giants capitalized, scoring on 6 of their first 7 possessions. On this one, Ron Johnson, number 30, crashed 35 yards for 7. Joe Orduña's hard-hitting running, typical on this day of the New York offensive team, brought the Giants close again. His running set up another Snead to Tucker touchdown, their second hookup on what was fast becoming Norm Snead's field day against his ex-teammates. Safety man punt returner Pete Athis, number 45, was lost to the Giants by injury, but set up yet another score with a scampering 48-yard run before he left the game. It seemed the Giants could do no wrong. By now, substitute quarterback Randy Johnson, number 11, had assumed field duties. His pass to substitute running back Vince Clements, number 29, was tipped in the air. But Clements scooped it up and ran for a 29-yard gain. Although they didn't try to roll up a big score, the Giants repeatedly converted what seemed like routine short yardage plays into scoreboard tallies. In the second half, Johnson connected twice with Don Herman for touchdowns on what were meant to be short gainers. The only bright spot for the Eagles came on a John Reeves bomb to Harold Jackson. It was the lone Philadelphia touchdown of the afternoon. Swift Harold retained the NFL receiving lead, his team notwithstanding, and now has accumulated over 900 aerial yards. The final score was 62-10, and no coach likes to roll up such a margin of victory. Alex Webster was not the exception as he extended his apologies to Ed Kayak. And there were no hard feelings as the two men commiserated. Coach Webster thought ahead to playoff possibilities, and why not? With a 7-4 season record and the kind of explosive offense shown last week, the high-flying Giants may yet roll to a playoff position.
Unbelievable, 62 points. The most the Giants have ever scored and the most the Eagles have ever given up. The Giant offense deserves at least a mention for best of the week, Pat.
I, of course, would agree with that, Tom, but I do think there are even more worthy candidates, such as Franco Harris, with another big day and another Giant step toward Rookie of the Year, maybe even All-Pro honors.
But probably the most worthy of all would be the entire defensive unit for the job they did on the NFC's top-rated offense.
The best of this week, the San Francisco 49er defense, and they really did do some job against those Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving Day.
Pat, you were out there. I always think that Wilcox maybe really sets the tempo for that defense for Nolan.
He seems to be sort of the policeman. He, of course, had an outstanding game, as did Skip Vanderbunt. He scored 2 touchdowns, as you know. They sacked the Dallas quarterbacks 9 times. They lead the league in that category. They just were an inspiration to the whole 49er ball club.
Edwards was tough, too, up front, huh?
Edwards, Bob Hoskins played very well. So did Cedric Hardman.
And they lose Jimmy Johnson?
Yeah, but they had a guy named Wendland Hall, who probably very few people have ever heard of, who came in and did quite a job. So they didn't really weaken themselves too much, despite the loss of Johnson.
And so San Francisco on the way back and using great defense, huh?
Well, let's check out what's going on with our games this week. If you don't mind, I'll say what the standings are. You are 17-13.
Thank you.
I am 10-20, and I guess that makes me humble at best.
What about this first one, Cleveland at Pittsburgh?
Well, Cleveland, of course, won the first game. I don't think they can do it again. I like Pittsburgh.
I'm going to go with Nick Scorch's Cleveland Brown. That Phipps is coming strong.
Yes, he is. Well, how about Detroit at Green Bay?
Oh, my goodness. I've always gone with the Lions before. I'll stick with Joe Schmidt and the Lions.
Green Bay has surprised, and we continue to say this every week, they've surprised a lot of people, and they continue to surprise me, so I'll go with the Packers.
Okay, Los Angeles at San Francisco.
Well, we were talking about those 49ers just a second ago and how well their defense is playing, so I like them. The Rams are a mystery.
Oh, I'm going to go with a mystery, since
Okay.
I am one, right? The Rams over San Francisco.
At any rate, we'll be back next week to show you what happens. I'm Pat Summerall.
And I'm Tom Brookshire, and we'll see you next week.